Cue medieval music. A declaration! A declaration to the king from the king of Camelot. Hey, kingdom of Telly. Welcome to Camelot. Today's episode, we will go over the history of Arthurian legends. Are they real? Was King Arthur real? Or no? Me? I'm actually King Arthur. Welcome. And this is my accomplice.
And me. I slept with your wife, and I am called Lancelot.
You slept with my wife?
Fuck bitches.
Fuck bitches, get money. Kill dragons. Find the Holy Grail.
Fuck bitches, kill dragons. Find Holy Grail. Why is the Holy Grail, why is that a thing in the legends when it's literally has to do with Jesus?
Because they're Christian. Or they were
I think it's very funny. Because it was hundreds of years later, and they were like, actually, we're gonna go search for Jesus' cup, as if that still exists.
Did you actually know that the Nazis also were searching for the Holy Grail? They were learning about the Arthurian legends, and they were like, the Holy Grail, it grants immortality, let's go find it. And that's also the plot of one of the Indiana Jones movies.
Really?
Yeah.
I get why it's cool from a historical perspective to be I have the cup that Jesus drank from.
Yeah.
But I don't think it actually has any magical powers to it. So today we're basically talking about was King Arthur and his related legends real?
Yes.
And to what extent did they exist?
Yes.
Is the theme of today.
Yes, because we watched Excalibur way back when, and we're like, was King Arthur real? And we didn't want to get into that.
Way back
we were
when,
rambling too much.
2 months ago.
And we're like, we should just make our own episode for this.
So we saved it for this episode. So from my research, we both did research on King Arthur and related legends for this episode. And I didn't take notes, I'm just balling it.
I found
I'm
4
freestyling
books.
over here. From my research, King Arthur was first mentioned in this old poem, but in a way that didn't exactly refer to him. It was it wasn't about him. It was just this dude was cool, but he was no Arthur. And that was the first time he was mentioned ever in literature. So obviously he must have been known before that, but we just don't have the literature representing
it was because
that, which I find fascinating. He was well known enough that whoever was writing this poem was yeah, this sword guy was cool, but he was not as good as King Arthur. And that was the first time King Arthur's ever mentioned. And it's who the fuck is that? Why are you talking about him like he's well known? And we must have just lost that literature.
Yeah, I was watching this video, which fucking fooled me. This guy, I was watching this 15-minute video about him. He was telling the stories of King Arthur and who he was, the people surrounding him, who they were, his whole story from birth to death, everything. And then at the end of the video, he goes,
everything.
As you know, I'm posting this video on April 1st, 2019. April Fools, this video's a lie. And I thought I just wasted 15 minutes of my life listening to the lies of this guy, telling a fake King Arthur story.
What an ass.
Because it was different from, it was slightly different from the original King Arthur story that I was constantly hearing.
That's horrible.
But actually he went, King Arthur's not a real person. And I was like, oh, okay. So what you told me is the true King Arthur story. But King Arthur wasn't a real person. And then he brought up a bunch of facts and research to why King Arthur wasn't a real person. But he said that King Arthur he could have been a real person, but he was more a battle commander than an actual king. There's more evidence.
Yeah, as far as I can tell, historians, the large historical consensus is that he was a man who probably at one point kind of was the commander of the British Army during like the Dark Ages, early Britain
Yeah.
type of thing.
He existed during the Dark Ages.
He probably was not a
and then
king. There's
fought
no
against-
record of him ever being king.
Yeah. He fought against the Saxons, who I've played so many games where you're
Yeah.
like in the Dark Ages fighting against the Anglo-Saxons, and it was never explained to me who the fuck the Anglo-Saxons were. I was just like, who are these random people?
Yeah, can you explain it? Do you know
Yes,
who they are?
I looked it up.
I don't understand
I
the
looked
history
up.
of it.
So the Anglo-Saxons are like the ancient German people. Also bringing this back to the Nazis.
Ancient German people.
The Nazis literally were like trying to go to Britain to like conquer them again, because they're like, they
Okay.
fucking destroyed our ancient German ancestors. We gotta get them back for that, and also find the Holy Grail. And so like, that's why they did that whole thing.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. They're fucking stupid.
So,
But the Anglo-Saxons are ancient German people who were kind of just like Romans. They were just like conquering the land, and they just went to Britain and just started conquering. Like this was so this is after the Roman Empire,
Roman Empire.
but
yeah.
like before
And
the Renaissance.
yeah.
Yeah, and that was like the Dark Ages.
That's my
Where everything
understanding.
like fell apart, and
Yeah.
we're like back at the Stone Age.
And that's why we don't have a lot of literature from that time period, which is why it's intriguing that the first mention of King Arthur is just being like, yeah, this guy's not as cool as King Arthur. And it's like, who the fuck is King Arthur? We lost that literature because fucking Dark
The guy
Ages, man.
in the video said it's because most, like, literally almost all people in Britain and, like, just, like, the United Kingdom in general were completely illiterate. They couldn't read or write, except for, like, the hierarchy, like,
Yeah.
clergy. Like, not even the king could, like, read or write. Like, it was just, like, a certain specific set of people that
So-
could write, but they didn't care to write history. They just cared about theology and, like, worshiping God. And so they never wrote any history down.
Something that was confusing me for a while was reading about King Arthur is they would spell Britain like Briton, and I was assuming that was an entirely different thing, and at some point I was like, oh, this literally just means Britain. I'm so stupid. I was interpreting as like an entirely different group of people. And so my follow-up question is, Britain is rather far from the area where Jesus lived. Like, were they planning on traveling across the entire continent to find Jesus' cup?
So,
How
okay, so
exactly did this work?
Britain was actually called, like, Britannia,
Yeah.
and then it turned to Britain with an O, and now it's, like, Britain with an A.
What was Britain while the Roman Empire was a thing? Like,
Shit, I gotta
were there
remember
people there? Like, what
back
were
to
they
my
called?
Roman Empire class. They...
Sorry, I have so many questions. I know a lot about ancient Greece, and I've like studied ancient
too!
Greece like at length because I took that history class. Do you remember my senior year of high school? I took a Greek
Oh, yeah,
history
yeah.
and a Greek
Yeah, yeah.
literature class. So I've read like all of the writings of those old Greek dudes, and like the Persian War, got that shit down. Alcibiades, my man, you know.
love that
like,
guy, that gay motherfucker. I fucking love him.
I learned everything that you learned from your video game in my class. We should have done more research.
Well, sorry, I didn't research
Fuck.
the origin of fucking Britain, man. I didn't think we were going that far back.
I didn't either, but then I was like, wait, if they were in Britain, why are they trying to go to like
They're
the
not
Middle
going
East to look for
they
Jesus'
never
cup?
left, like, Europe to find the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail.
Did they
is-
think
no,
Jesus'
so-
cup was magically
no,
in
so
Europe?
God talked to them and was like, I'm sending you on.
God talked to Arthur.
Not to Arthur. He talked to, like, his
Not
his
to
team of
Arthur.
people, his
Who-
clerics.
okay. So Arthur's the king, and he has some like priests that kind of work for
Yes,
him.
and they were like, God has a quest for
Okay.
you. You can find
God
the Holy Grail,
has a
the
quest
cup
for you.
that Jesus drank out of at the Last Supper. It will grant you immortality.
Okay.
Because in
That sounds stupid.
and they're like, you have to go search for it. I'm not telling you where it is. Do I know where it
Okay.
is? Yes. Where it is on the Bridge of Death. literally and metaphorically. Like, you can only find the Holy Grail when you're on, like, the brink of death. So, like, as you're dying, that is when you can find the Holy Grail. Like, in the movie Excalibur, you know how when that one night, I forget who, he's, like, hanging from a tree, and he sees this gate, and he sees the Holy Grail on the other side. And he has to go and cross the gate, and the god's like, you have found the Holy Grail.
And then
he's like, wait, no, I must
my
become
understanding
my king.
My understanding is that Arthur never found the Holy Grail, but one of his knights did because that knight was the only one who was worthy of it.
One did find the knight. It was Lancelot's
That's my understanding.
Son. Lancelot's son.
So, like, why was Arthur the one sent to find the Holy Grail if he wasn't worthy?
He wasn't. God was just like, I have a quest for you guys. Because I think he was, like, asking for a quest. He was like, what do I do now? I, like, saved everyone, and, like, what do I do now? And God is like, I have a quest. Go find the Holy Grail. And he's like, okay. And he sent out all of the Knights of the Round Table, because obviously he's not going to do shit. He's king. He's got all this shit to do. So he sent out all his knights. And there's only one knight. His name was Galahad, who's Lancelot's son. And he was, like, the purest knight. That was, like, he was, like, Galahad, the purest knight. And so...
He's a good dude,
he was...
Like Thor. He's worthy of the hammer.
Yeah, he's worthy of the Holy Grail.
Okay. And did he get immortality? Like, do you think that dude's, like, still hanging out with us today?
No. He almost...
Just imagine Lancelot's son
he almost
is
got
just,
it.
like, a guy.
In my notes, I wrote, he almost got it, but I think he died. Because he was on that brink of death, and he just didn't make it across the gate or the bridge or whatever.
That's so interesting. Okay. Another confusion I have is most of my research indicates that King Arthur lived, like, around, like, the year 500-ish, but then that movie, that Holy Grail movie said
Monty
that it
Python?
took place in the 900s.
Yeah, it was like the 8th century.
And then I didn't know Monty Python was a comedy group, and that I went down a whole rabbit hole because the only time I've ever heard of Monty Python is in reference to this movie.
Yes.
Like, I'm assuming this movie is what they're most well known for. So I just thought that like Monty Python was a character in the movie or something. And then because I didn't know anything about this movie. I've never seen it before. And then I researched it. It's a comedy group. So I'm just guessing they got the year wrong because they're a comedy group. Because every other bit of research I've done indicates that it's around the year like 500, 600, not 900. Around the year 500. From what I've gathered is that there was probably a British military guy who was really good with his sword, and then he kind of got famous for his swordsmanship skills, and then hundreds of years later, this author, once we're out of the Dark Ages, took these stories he's been told about this man and combined it with other bits of folklore type things and created the story of Arthur.
Yeah, so I'm gonna read you what I have in here because I think it'll answer your. I'm just gonna tell you the general story of King Arthur and all the people relating to him, and I think it might answer some of your questions about the people. But so the whole King Arthur thing was mentioned first by Geoffrey of Monmouth or whatever.
Yeah. And
that's like he wrote today's version of King Arthur. I hate this camera. And the guy I watched said that he basically took 5 different individual like leaders around Europe and kind of combined them into this one character, and then one of them probably included
that man
Arthur
claimed,
the Knight.
That man claimed that actually he was translating something like from Latin. However, that original text has never been found, but he claimed that he got like his Arthur figure by translating something from Latin. And I believe that is that King Arthur story. I think so. If that's the King Arthur story book. And I believe that is like the third piece of literature about him I've researched. There's also a book about all of the kings of Britain that he's mentioned.
Yeah, it was like the
before that.
history of the kings of Britain.
The history of the kings of Britain. Yeah, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay, and then before that, there was that bit of poetry that mentioned
Yes.
Arthur. Is technically the first mention of him.
Yes.
Okay.
But the history of the kings of Britain is like the modern version of what we know of Arthur today. And he's the one who added all like the stories about him. Like he's a king, and he developed the Round Table, and he fell in love with this woman, and he had an affair with his sister, had an incest baby, had a baby with this girl. His half sister had a baby and is the ruler of Norway. Blah blah blah. He added all that.
Dude was just writing stuff.
He added all that, and then another dude added the stuff with like Lancelot had an affair with King Arthur's wife, and then the stuff like that. But like Geoffrey created like Merlin and Morgana and King Arthur, not like Arthur himself, but like the king version of him. And he basically took like inspiration from 5 different.
Now Merlin is interesting because
I will talk to you about Merlin.
Merlin. While I can find evidence about King Arthur's existence, at least as like probably a military figure, I can't find anything referencing probably any legitimate source of Merlin's existence. So that leads me to believe that he is a literary convention that was created, right? Like he was just a character that was made up. But in that case, like, it's really impressive for this dude to just make up a character this significant because Merlin is pretty much the standard like mentor character from the hero's journey that pretty much everything is based on today, like Obi-Wan Kenobi. Like, this is a very impressive literary invention if this guy just made up this character, you know? Because this dude was just writing like a history book. Like, how did he invent such a compelling character? You know? So it's like, is he based on some other lost literature maybe? I don't know.
So I think it's really cool that Merlin is like the creation of all wizards today. Like, he's Dumbledore and Gandalf and literally like essentially inspired Harry Potter and
exactly
like all the magical shit that
just
it could
like
ever be invented today.
In general,
it's just this one guy being like, you know what would be cool if this guy in a light blue star cloak with a tall hat and a large wooden staff was just
and a long beard,
being a long white beard, just being like a dad to this king who's like also magic and can shoot lightning from his fingers. That would be cool, you know?
Now,
sounds like a kid's writing this.
Now, this magic thing was established in the time period, from my understanding, watching that Holy Grail movie, is there's an entire scene. That Holy Grail movie was, I watched like the first half of it, right? And it was so funny because the first 2 minutes are just arguing about coconuts, and I'm like, who wrote this? Why? But anyway, there's an entire scene where they're like accusing a woman of witchcraft. So which I also find interesting, because literally, like, 1,000 years later in America, they were still doing witch trials. Like, people were doing witch trials for just 1,000 years. That's crazy to me. If that's correct, then that's probably what that the idea of the wizard is based on. But then, did he invent the word wizard? Like, because people were calling people witches then, right? So, like, did he invent wizards
I don't think
as
the
a
word
concept?
wizard existed. Okay, so let me tell you about Merlin. So Merlin.
Okay.
From this video, the video I'm talking about will be in the description, if you're interested. So Merlin is based on, it was inspired by, he's essentially not a wizard, like a classic Merlin wizard that you think of from like Shrek. He's not that. Merlin was like a Celtic druid, that's what they call it. There was like this little cult of Celtic druids who are essentially, you know, like modern witchcraft, how like people take a bunch of herbs and like grind them up and like set them on fire and like say a little prayer.
That's what they did.
The world. That's kind of like what they were doing. They were essentially like green witches or like plant witches, or like they're really into apothecary. And they had a connection to the spiritual world and stuff like that. And they lived with nature, and they would practice like herbal medicine and stuff like that. And you kind of see that in Excalibur as well, when it's like Guinevere and Arthur's wedding, that scene, and Merlin's like in the back, and Morgana's like, "You have to teach me your ways."
Right.
And he's like, "What's that root
Yeah.
over there?" And she's like, "It's the mandrake root." And he's like, "What's that leaf over there?" And she's like, "It's an ivy of the thingy thing." And I'm like, okay, so like he's testing her on the different plants around, because that's how like you make potions and magic and spells and stuff. Like it's all from mixing all these different plants and spices and stuff. And so Merlin
she was like a
was
druid.
essentially, yeah, he was like a little druid forest man who
druid
probably
man. Forest
did
fairy.
it like he didn't. You know how like sick people, like the religion sick, they don't cut their hair, and so men have like these like really long ass beards. I feel like that's like a religious thing that Merlin would have done. That
makes
I mean,
sense.
from the
So
pictures
do you
that the
think
guy
Merlin
showed,
was a real person?
he could have been.
Or do you think he's a character based on those types of people? Like this
I
guy
think
knew
so.
those types of people existed, so he created the character? That's probably my best guess. That's probably my theory.
Essentially, Merlin was the caretaker slash father figure slash mentor slash what are they called? Advisor?
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 Jinx.
He was kind of like that to Arthur. And so the story that this guy tells is basically Arthur's born from that affair, like King Uther, Pendragon, wants to fuck his enemy's wife. Like, go watch Excalibur, the movie from the 1980s that we did an episode on way back when. Go watch it, because the movie is actually pretty close to what this guy was telling me, which is kind of what Geoffrey of Monmouth wrote. And so
Is it a coincidence that the last name of the father is like Pendragon and like dragons are a thing? Is that a coincidence?
I don't know. I didn't look into dragons. But essentially the things,
Cuz from my understanding is there's one of like the earliest Arthur legends is that like underneath the castle there was a white dragon and a red dragon who were fighting, and that made like the ground shake, and then Merlin fixed it, is what I believe I read about. So there are dragons in like the Arthur stories, and then the father's last name has dragon in it, but I don't know if that's just a language coincidence or if that's related.
I feel like that was just like a volcano or like an earthquake, because they could sound like dragon
Probably.
roars. And Merlin,
And it was so
fixing
specific. It was like, yeah, there was one red dragon and one white dragon, and they were wrestling.
Yeah, that was probably like a volcano or something that they just built their castle on. Also, in Excalibur the movie, Pendragon like begs Merlin to give him like a little spell to transform him into King Arthur's mom's husband's husband, but it would have probably
who was like a different king.
Yeah, in real life, Merlin probably just gave him like a plant to drug the woman so he could rape her. And
that's a really smart interpretation.
yeah,
That's a very smart interpretation.
He actually said Merlin gave the guy, Pendragon, like a drink to drink. But I'm like, no, he like definitely gave her like a substance to drug her, to have hallucinations like, oh, you're my husband,
Oh, yeah.
yes. Like, yeah, I'm in love with you. Have your way with me. Like, that's the obvious solution to that. And so when
Assuming these were all real people, if that would have been
Yes.
what happened in real life.
Yeah, and so when Arthur was abandoned, Merlin picked him up and was his dad. And Merlin, in Excalibur the movie, Morgana was like in love with Merlin, but actually in real life, I don't know. In the real story that this guy wrote, that Jeffrey wrote, Merlin falls in love with the Lady of the Lake. And the Lady of the Lake...
That's
okay, the interesting
I think
thing...
I read that too.
The interesting thing is, the Britons, like, believed in fairies, in the Fae, but they, like, hated witches. And that's a weird thing. Like, they would go to the Fae and the fairies to, like, ask for blessings, but then they would burn all the witches.
Yeah.
But the Faes and the fairies
That
were
doesn't
just
make
a different
sense.
style, like, they were just a different type of witch. And so I'm like, what? Because the Lady of the Lake was a real person. Her name was Vivian, and she was literally a lady who lived on a lake. Like, in a little cabin beside the lake. And Merlin fell in love with her.
Oh, that was a real person?
Yes, she wasn't just like a lady in the lake with her hand out of
Is
the
she a real
water.
person in the story that the guy wrote? Or, like, are you
Yes.
saying she was a real person in real life?
Sure.
Because this guy wrote the story, like, hundreds of years later.
If the story
So in
was
his story,
real,
the Lady of the Lake
yes.
was a real person?
Yes.
Okay, but, like, also in his story, she was, like, a human in the story.
Yes. She was
Okay.
she was seen by the Britons as a fairy. Like, she was called, like, the
Okay.
Fairy of the Lake or something. Like, what did...
Something that I was reading that was confusing me is I have read 2 different accounts of Excalibur's existence. So, in some accounts that I've been reading, they call both the sword in the stone that he pulls out Excalibur, and the sword that the Lady in the Lake gives him Excalibur. But in other versions of the story I've read, the sword in the stone is a different sword, and then the Lady in the Lake gives Arthur a different sword called Excalibur. So,
What I read...
what is your understanding of that?
is that the Lady of the
Because
Lake...
I've read both stories.
Vivian... So the people would go to her, and, like, a ritual they would do to get a blessing from her is they would throw their weapon into the lake that she lived at. And so in this lake, there were just, like, hundreds of swords, hundreds of maces, hundreds of, like, daggers, and broadswords and shit like that. And so, while Merlin and Vivian, the Lady of the Lake, were, like, husband and wife, there was Arthur. And then Vivian also adopted a baby, Lancelot. And so Lancelot and Arthur were actually, like, grew up as brothers.
Oh,
and
that's her
came
kid?
together. Well, it was like a banded baby, like Merlin adopted Arthur.
I didn't know that.
She adopted
I didn't know
Lancelot.
that's how Lancelot.
Yeah, because
That's
he's
cool.
called Lancelot of the Lake.
I didn't know that.
And so he's
That's
like
so cool. I like
the
Lancelot. I
son
think
of
he's
the
a
Lady
cool
of the
dude.
Lake. He's an asshole. So when they were training,
He's cool. He's like a very good fighter.
when they were training, when they were beginning to train to be the amazing knights they would become, the Lady of the Lake went into the lake and pulled out some swords. And we're like, here you go. Here's your swords. And the guy who made the video, he referenced this person who said that Excalibur was just another generic name for sword. So, like, a sword would just be an Excalibur. Which, honestly,
So they could have been the same sword, they could have been a different sword.
About it. They're all
Yeah.
Excalibur. We're all Excalibur. Everything's Excalibur. You're Excalibur. You're Excalibur.
Both
You're
swords are Excalibur. They could have
I'm
been the same
Excalibur.
sword. They could have been a different sword. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm caught up.
And
I
so,
understand.
From there, Morgana is born.
Morgana
Half sister of
was
Arthur.
born.
Morgana wants to be
Right,
a druid like Merlin.
So they have the same mom, but a different dad because
Yes.
their dad died. Arthur's dad, who was king, died, and then the mom was like a different woman.
No, the
and
mom-
then half sister, same mom.
So Morgana's dad is the Arthur's mom's original husband, who Pendragon
Yeah.
pretended to be. And so
Yeah.
Morgana,
So is Morgana younger than Arthur?
yes, by like a couple years.
Okay.
And so, hear this. I'm gonna tell you how the incest baby came to be. I'm so excited to talk about the incest baby. So, Morgana wanted to be a druid like Merlin, and so she approached Merlin and was like,
Okay.
"Teach me your ways," because he was like the local druid. And
The
so
local druid.
he started teaching her his ways, and she met Arthur. They don't know they're siblings. They don't know they're related. Merlin doesn't tell them that they're related yet. And so Arthur and Morgana fall in love, and they're like
Okay.
kissing on the lake in a little boat, you know, Ariel, Little Mermaid
Okay.
moment. And Merlin's like, absolutely not.
Okay.
No, you guys can't be together. Doesn't tell them why. For some fucking reason. And they're like, no, we're in love. We're gonna stay in love. And so
Arthur and his half sister are like a thing right now.
they're dating. And so
But what about Arthur's wife?
yeah,
Are
I'm
they not
getting to
married
that.
at
I'm
this
getting-
point?
No. They haven't met yet.
Okay.
And so
Okay.
let's see. I think Arthur eventually, when Pendragon dies, Merlin approaches Arthur and is like, "Hey, you're that guy's son. You're the successor, so you're now king of Britain. So you gotta go be king of Britain." And so he kind of like pauses his relationship with Morgana, and he meets Guinevere, but their relationship isn't out of love, it's out of like political relations. So they get married for political purposes to combine kingdoms.
As kings do.
And
Right.
they don't have a kid. Guinevere and Arthur don't have a kid. And Morgana goes to Norway and marries the king of Norway. And they have a son who births one of my favorite knights, Sir Gawain, who is in one of my favorite Arthurian tales, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. We're gonna watch that movie during my movie month. I'm so excited for it, even though it's a really bad movie.
Okay.
Um,
I didn't realize like how many generations that the Arthur tales went through.
oh yes. And
So that's cool.
Morgana
I didn't
and
realize
Arthur would, cheat on their spouses with each other. And eventually
And Merlin's still not telling them they're related.
Merlin like found out and was like,
Not like they would care.
"You guys are
you know.
siblings."
Kings were doing incest
No, yeah,
1,000
yeah,
years
that's
later.
literally
It
what
wouldn't
this guy
surprise
in
me.
the video mentioned. He's like, I mean, everyone was doing incest, so like, didn't really matter, but it was still frowned upon.
It's not like they would care.
It was still frowned upon during this time. But like,
Weird.
Merlin found out and was like, "You guys are siblings. You guys are related. You guys are blood related. Stop." And they were like, "No." And so they had sex and
No.
made their little incest baby.
I'm king. What are you gonna do about it?
And his name was Mordred.
All right.
And
Mordred. Is he the one who kills Arthur?
Yes. And so Mordred
Okay.
is born. He stays in Norway. Arthur and Lancelot, or Guinevere seeing that Arthur's like not being loyal. He doesn't know, she doesn't know who with.
Okay.
But like, she's like, "You're not being loyal." And so she goes to
His
Lancelot
sister.
and is like, "I love you!" And Lancelot's like, "You're really hot." And then they have an affair. And
Do they have an affair, baby? Cause that'd be cool.
no, Lancelot's married to this woman named Elaine. They have Galahad, the purest knight. He's like the good knight. He's the white angel.
Are these modern translations of their names, or were they literally named these things?
There's probably like an old English version of their names.
Yeah.
And then they were translated
Okay.
into this. But, so there's
Okay.
Galahad, who's like the White Angel Knight, and then there's Mordred, who's like the Red Devil Knight. Galahad is the guy who finds the Holy Grail almost, but then dies. Lancelot gets killed by Arthur for having the affair with Guinevere, even though, because he's like, you're my best friend, you're my brother, you fucking betrayed me, you have to die. Guinevere doesn't get killed, but she has to watch Lancelot die. Which is like suffering.
So Arthur kills Lancelot?
Yes, which is like suffering enough. And so
they were like best friends. That's
yeah,
really sad.
Which is, yeah, that's, I mean, it's horrible.
Especially because Arthur was also having an affair.
Yeah, it's like you
what a
were cheating on your wife.
You're killing your best friend.
And then your best friend cheats on with
You're killing your best friend for
but,
fucking
like,
your wife, but you are cheating on your wife.
with your sister.
That's shitty.
Yeah, man.
You're cheating on your wife with your sister, but when your best friend fucks your wife, you kill him. Come on, dude. What a dick.
He's king. He can do whatever the fuck he wants.
I'm on Team Lancelot here.
Okay, question. Not related to anything. What color is Lancelot?
Red.
Red? Ew. He's
Is
like
that the wrong answer?
He's like, you know, like the color of Cinderella? How she's like a light blue? That's Lancelot.
I'm sorry that I disagree with you.
Lancelot's not red. King Arthur's like red. And
Lancelot
green and yellow.
It's a warm color.
Lancelot's a nice crispy icy blue. Anyways, back to the story. Back over to Norway, where Morgana, Mordred, and Sir Gawain. Gawain becomes king of Norway. Mordred doesn't know that his dad is his mother's brother. And so one day she's like, hey, you're an incest baby. And so Mordred has anger issues. And from being an incest baby, like incest does fucked up things to you.
Probably from being an incest baby.
And so he gets really violent and he is like,
my heart.
I can't like stand being an incest baby, so I'm gonna go kill my dad because he did this to me. He created me.
Well, lots of people are incest babies.
Yeah, but also he like wanted to
especially
be king,
in this time period.
But also he couldn't tell like the public that he was an incest baby because it was frowned upon. It was so common, but it was also really frowned upon to be an incest baby, which is interesting.
Especially because it's especially common among royalty, like specifically.
Yeah, to keep
their
the bloodline
pure.
clean. Yeah.
So,
yeah, but
yeah.
so
okay.
he goes to England.
All right.
And kills Arthur. You know, the classic battle. Or no, he shows up and is like, I am the successor to King Arthur, and everyone's like, huh? In what relation are you? And he's like, I'm his
son.
Nephew. He actually said nephew because he's like, oh, Morgana's.
Fair enough. He is technically his nephew.
Yeah, nephew, son, nephew. So Guinevere's a single lady. She's like frolicking around England, being like, I'm a single lady. I need to find love.
Oh, the single
Mordred
ladies.
is like, whoa,
Put your hands up.
You're King Arthur's wife. And she's like, yeah, I am. I'm single though. And he's like,
but I'm a single lady.
You're my dad's wife. And she's like, yeah, I am.
You
and he's
wanna
like,
fuck?
You're really hot. And she's like, yeah, I am. And he's like,
oh no.
You wanna get married? She's like, hell yeah, I do. And so he steals his dad's wife.
So they got divorced, and now she is with her like stepson.
Yes. They're not blood related.
This is
so
like
it's,
stepmom
less
porn.
weird.
This is stepmom porn.
Yes, this is stepmom fanfic right here. First ever stepmom fanfic ever written. King Arthur
got
legend.
some incest stuff going on. This is stepmom fanfic. I think this author just had some kinks he needed to work out.
Yeah,
he was just writing fanfiction.
Some really scary things. I mean, he was a man, and obviously all men have like really terrifying, nasty, disgusting things about women going on in their brains at all times, but they can't share it. So might as well write about it. Mordred goes and kills Arthur. Goes and is like, I'm going to be king. You're an asshole. You made me this way. I hate you. Stole your ex-wife, by the way. She's my lady now. I'm gonna kill you. And so they have their little battle, and they actually kill both each other. Like, Arthur and Mordred stab each other simultaneously. They both die on the battlefield. They kill each other. They both die. And that's the end of King Arthur's story.
Yay! I believe in dragons. When I was a kid, there was this history Animal Channel type of DVD movie I had that was about dragons, and it animated dragons. It's from like the early 2000s, but it animated dragons so realistically that I thought it was real. I thought it was like a real wildlife documentary about the history of dragons, and I believed in dragons, and I had books on dragonology as a kid. I was so into dragons. My only tattoo is a dragon. I am very into dragons. It was good. It was good. Who's your favorite character of Arthur Legends?
Actually, I feel like we should ask the question. Do you think Arthur and his surrounding characters were real?
I think Arthur was a real military figure, and I think the rest of the characters are based off of a combination of real people at the time. And honestly, Arthur also based on a combination of real people. Like, I think the other characters are based off of knights who existed at the time, and Merlin's based off of, like, what did you call them? Druids?
Celtic druids.
And I think Arthur is a combination of that military guy and probably some kings who existed at the time. And I think that all of their dynamics are made up for a good story. That's my interpretation of this.
I think that too. I just looked up dragons real quick, and dragons are a whole nother thing that we can talk about, because dragons don't always show up in Arthurian legends. They show up literally around the entire world, in East Asia, in Sumerian legends, and also
I think,
that.
given that dragons show up around the entire world, they must have been real.
I don't know.
My gut just tells me dragons have to have been real, but it's like, why don't we have evidence of it? And also my understanding is that dragons are very similar to dinosaurs, but then also have wings. And then we know
I feel
that
like they're
dinosaurs
a type of
often
pterosaur.
turn into birds. Dragons must have just been a type of dinosaur that people saw. But then why don't we, like, have
I don't know.
evidence of them?
That'll be another episode for you guys. I'm gonna end this off with the definition of a legend, because the King Arthur, everything about it, they're all legends. They're all called legends. They're not myths. They're not fairy tales. They're not folk tales. And I have my world mythology textbook. A legend is an original literary story based on a supposedly historical figure or event. A story which contains elements or themes from earlier mythological narrative transmitted by oral tradition.
That definition is actually very close to what I just said my opinion on it was. So that lines up great. Okay, great. I think they're legends. What would you rate King Arthur? I think it's very fun. You know, everyone loves a good knight, some dragons. These are, like, a lot of my favorite, like, literary themes. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna give it a good... And it's really fun with all this, like, kink stuff going on here. I'm gonna give it a good 4.5 stars.
You almost get whiplash from all, like, the, oh my god, they're related, but they had an affair, but they have an incest baby, but oh my god, you had a baby, and they had a baby, and then his wife married his kid, and then, like, that's, oh my god, I'm getting, my neck hurts.
I like this. I'm into this.
I'd also give it a 4.5. I love Arthurian legends. They're one of my favorite
Hell yeah.
legends.
Who's your favorite character? Mine's Lancelot.
Read. I also like Lancelot, but Crystal Ice Blue Lancelot.
I thought you were gonna say Merlin.
Or Merlin. Merlin used to be blue for me, like a nice, like, classic blue, but now he's green, because he's now a Celtic druid. And Celtic and druids are both, like, green and yellow to me.
I agree. Final
You're-
note is I really want to go to one of those things where you try and pull the sword out of the stone just to see if I could do it. I just genuinely want to try that.
Where do you do that?
You know, there's like events at like Renaissance fairs.
Oh.
I want to go try and pull a sword out of a stone. I want to be the king of England. Peace out. Thanks for listening to our Telly Talk. If you want any similar conspiracy theory history podcasts, comment down below, and we would love to do that. I have some ideas now that we're talking about this, and I think we should edit our schedule maybe to alternate with movies and things like this.
Yeah.
Because this was fun.
Yeah. I think this is my excuse to, like, do research outside of school. Because, like, once you're done with school, you're like... you have, like, the urge to, like, write a paper, but you're like, why the fuck would I write a paper? Why would I research something? That's just wasting my time on something. But this is our excuse.
This is research time.
This is our excuse to, like, write a paper and research.
If you like this, you should subscribe, because we do podcasts once a week about movies and things like this, and we also play games.
Down
so
there.
you can subscribe. It's totally free.
Down. Yes. And go follow our TikTok and Twitter and Instagram and Twitch.
Bye!
Goodbye. My liege.